Welcome. Tonight, we're going to have a person on who affects everybody's life, and like a lot of people that do help us out in town, you don't hear about them or you don't call them unless there's a problem. So why don't we start with an introduction?
Well, it's great to be back on your show. Ryan Fatman, the state senator for the towns of Milford, Hopedale, Mendon, and the area, and 13 others. And, just really enjoying the job 8 months in.
I was going to say, now, Senator Fatman, is it taking grip yet? Are you getting used to it?
Well, my favorite is when things come in the mail to me addressed at the State House, the Honorable Fat Man. I always get a chuckle out of that one.
The Honorable Fatman.
Yeah.
As opposed to the dishonorable.
Right, yeah. Hopefully we never have to say that, for sure.
Was it everything you expected?
It's been a lot of work, and I expected that. And of course, I had big shoes to fill with Senator Moore, and I've worked really hard to do my best to fill those shoes. I've worked very hard to work in a bipartisan manner, cross party lines in order to get things done. I think one of the biggest concerns when I was campaigning was that, there was a lot of big ideas that I had, but also, would I be able to deliver for the town of Milford? Would I be able to get things done? And I think over the course of the last 8 months, I've been able to answer those questions, and some of the things I have been able to deliver. Working with Representative Fernandez, getting $250,000 out of the bond bill for Godfrey Brook. He and I worked together just recently in the state budget, getting $50,000 for Milford Youth Center, $50,000 for Pheno Field. And despite, the governor from my party, who I admire and like, vetoing some of those projects, we were able to work together.
Well, Pheno Field, they went against you.
They did, yes. But, using my influence and working across party lines, I was able to emphasize the importance of that. And in the Senate, we were able to get it passed no problem. And same thing with Rep. Fernandez in the House. So he's been a pleasure working with. I've really enjoyed working in the state Senate and getting to know the 39 other state senators. And I'm actually going to be bringing the Senate president to dinner in September in Milford. Not going to say where, but
Cool.
My wife and I are hosting them. So we're really enjoying getting to know everybody.
I mean, you'd almost have to work across party lines. I mean, there's 12 Republicans in Massachusetts, 6 of them in the Senate.
Right.
I mean, I'm being facetious, but you don't have much of a choice, do you?
Well, you always have to work with people. I mean, that's my dad. Came home every day, businessman for 44 years at General Mills. And, you could see sometimes the frustration on his face, but he had a job to do. And in the private sector, that's what people do. Sometimes you don't always like the people you work with. Sometimes you don't always agree with them. But there's no excuse for being respectful. You should be respectful, and that's how the job should be done. That's how I've tried to conduct myself. Stay firm in my positions and what I believe, but also respectably explaining them and why I believe that.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, I always refer to, Tip O'Neill and Reagan. Probably the two most diametrically opposed political views.
Yeah.
I've ever seen, but yet, they always joked that after the cameras were off, they respected each other and could go have a drink.
Absolutely, and that's the way it should be. And I think a lot of people, they sit there and they watch the television and they don't understand, well, why are people not getting along? And I think for me, as a younger individual, from a new generation of leaders that are stepping up to the plate, I think that it's incredibly important that people like myself work with others of different ideologies and different walks of life, because if people check out of this process, we've got big problems. We need people to be engaged. I always think of Winston Churchill as one of my favorite guys in history, and he said, basically democracy is the worst system of government except for all others tried. And he spoke to the fact that, it's not easy. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it can even be ugly, especially around campaign and election time. But we don't pick up weapons. We don't attack each other with, our weapons. We talk through things and we debate them. And sometimes they're tough, but we have to have those conversations, and we have to do so in a peaceful, respectful way.
Now, if you look at, you talk about coming from the younger generation. In the past, there were 12 Republicans quietly scattered amongst Massachusetts.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you look at Blackstone Valley, there's more than 12 of them.
Yeah, we've the area's changed. I think it's partly, there's several reasons to that change. I think first of all, the Democratic Party has gone a little bit further to the left than a lot of people who consider themselves Democrats would like. And I think they're used to the JFK, FDR, union household type Democratic Party. And today it's more of a party that has gone to the left of Elizabeth Warren and the president and Deval Patrick. And, there's some people who love that, support it, and that's fine.
The people on the far left scare me as much as when I look at the square states, the people on the far right.
Right.
Anybody who spouts dogma, and it feels like dogma, to me, I mean, I've always laughed saying, I can't be red, I can't be blue, I'm just purple.
Right.
And it's not because of Holy Cross, even though it is Holy Cross.
Right.
But it worries me when I start seeing the parties, the Republicans shifting a little further to the right and the Democrats shifting to the left. And I sit there and say, I don't fit into either one anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. And I actually think that's part of my overall point with Worcester County and what you're saying about the Blackstone Valley is a lot of people have decided they don't want to be a Democrat, they don't want to be a Republican, they've gone and become an independent, and they've been willing to listen. And because they've been willing to listen, where Republicans may not have been able to make the arguments beforehand or they weren't willing to listen, they now are. And that's a big change. And Worcester County has really become, as far as the state goes, a pretty Republican county. Charlie Baker won it with 56% of the vote. I think a lot of people were surprised with how well I did.
The whole swatch seemed this, red, somebody took a red brush and painted a swatch, a swoop.
Yeah, and
right?
I'm not sure, quite frankly, that it's an endorsement of, Republican ideas. It may be sort of a warning about what Beacon Hill is doing. Maybe people in this area think that when you tie a gas tax to inflation, that's not right. And when we talk about, welfare benefits and the availability of those to people who really shouldn't be using them, I think that's what is at play and the issues at hand, not necessarily an endorsement of one political party or another. And those are some things I campaigned on. And I think by talking and giving voice to those issues, a lot of people were willing to make a change. And, those are some of the things I'm working now in the state Senate. Actually, today we've been getting a lot of phone calls, and we were talking a little bit earlier. So a gentleman named Byron Rushing was a state rep from the North End in Boston, and he filed a bill.
Now, why aren't you in there stopping that vote this minute?
Well, I'm pretty sure that bill is that was a committee hearing, and so everyone is aware who's listening at home. Every bill gets 3 hearings, so this is just the first step in a long process.
People hear it and they say, it's being voted on.
Exactly.
Ryan, get in there and stop it right now. And you're like,
absolutely.
Wait a minute, 2 more hearings. There's this democratic process we have to go through.
Yeah, and that rush and that excitement is a good thing because we like people to be asking, well, what is the process? What's the status of this particular bill? And we got a lot of that today. And so it was only a hearing. And basically what it would do is allow for unlawful immigrants to get access to public benefits, housing, welfare, whatever it might be, licenses, and as the title of the bill suggests, start the pathway to becoming a United States citizen. Now, the problem with that is, as anyone would know...
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding. This is for illegal aliens.
Correct.
Not the legal.
Yep.
Not the people who've gone through the process, like my grandfather,
correct,
my mother, my father, and came here legally. These are benefits for the illegals.
Right. Yep. People who have come here unlawfully and, access to those benefits. And so this is a gentleman from Boston who's filed this bill, a state rep, and I worked with him when I was in the State House for 4 years, and I would suggest that we probably don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. But the thing is that he suggests it's a pathway to citizenship. And you and I know, and most people know, that the only way that a pathway to citizenship can be created is through the federal government. And so that is a false argument. It's wrong. And to me, it's not fair to the people who went through the legal process, and also many of the hardworking taxpayer people who live in Milford or Mendon or Hopedale or wherever, in central Massachusetts and throughout our Commonwealth. And they watch that and they get really disturbed. And I can guarantee people, if it does make it to the Senate floor, I will stop it. I have several procedural things that I can do in the rules to stop types of bills, and that is one that I would go out and use political capital on.
If we had so much money that we didn't have places to spend, I may want to listen with a different ear. But all I'm hearing is we don't have enough money to really take care of the handicapped Massachusetts residents.
Right. Yeah, and I hear that all the time.
You've got people who were born with a handicap. They didn't do drugs. They didn't do weird things to get them there. They were born that way. They're our kids.
Yeah.
And we give them subsistence allocations of money.
Yeah.
Now, I've got to believe, and if I'm wrong, tell me, there's a fixed pot of money in Massachusetts. If you're taking a ladle and giving it to illegal people, isn't that less you can give to the kids and the seniors?
Yeah, and many of the legal people who are living here appropriately.
Sit there and say, there's a lot of seniors that work their whole life in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Who need help with medical and all sorts of things that we can't afford to give it to them.
We started off with this theme of respectful dialogue, and one of the things that actually bothers me when we have these conversations about immigration is that on the other side, people who want to do this tend to imply that if you're against giving somebody a benefit that legally right now they're really not supposed to be eligible for, there are some loopholes in that law that I'd like to see closed, but that you're anti-immigrant. And to me, that's absolutely incorrect.
I was at a meeting where a nice lady accused me of being anti-Portuguese. And I never laughed so hard in all my life.
Right.
But I let her go on, and she told me about my heritage, and then I asked her a simple question in Portuguese. And she looked at me and says, I don't understand. I said, oh, my name's Alberto Brands Correa. Before you lecture me on my heritage, would you learn my language?
Yeah.
And it was like, wait a minute. How dare you accuse me of being against somebody? I'm not against illegals on this issue. I'm for my mother, my neighbor, 91 years old, never took a penny out of the government.
Yeah.
But she can't get extra medical because there's not enough money. If you're going to put money anywhere, I'd rather see it go towards the people who built this state.
Yeah, and there's also this large group, especially in Milford, of legal immigrants who came here through the legal process and, maybe need a little extra help because their husband lost a job, the wife lost a job, there was a medical emergency, and we have built in those social safety nets to support people and to make sure they become a trampoline that when you fall, you bounce and you get back up on your feet and you go back to work and you become a productive member of society. But those are for legal immigrants who have come here the right way, and for Massachusetts residents who have been living here for generations. And so to open up this floodgate, I don't think is a good idea. As I've committed here tonight, I will stop it. We have this procedure. It's Rule 23 in the Senate. There's all these rules, that no one understands, but if you really read them and dig into them, you can use procedures to stop bad bills. And so I have three, as a state senator, I have three abilities to what they call lay a bill on the table, which means if someone proposes it, it gets to the Senate floor, I invoke Rule 24, and then it's set aside for the next 48 hours. And typically that means it dies. And if it's brought back, I can do it again. And the only time I cannot do it is in the last 7 days of the session, at which point we have a real heated discussion and debate, which is what we should have.
What's the logic? I mean, I want to help everybody. Kumbaya, the world is good, I want to help everybody. But if I look at a senator and I say, sir, you're not giving me enough money to take care of my vets, my senior, and I go through it. How can you say you want to take money away from them? Because you are taking it away.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's
a fixed pot of soup. If I take a ladle for one, That's one ladle less that I can spread out amongst the others.
Yeah, no, it's a fairness issue. And we have to be as fair as possible, but we have to be holistic in that fairness. And, you know, people who have come here legally, I mean, I met some people in this town who spent 20 years from the time that they arrived individually bringing over family members and how much it cost. And you just got to keep that in mind. We're in the month of August, same month that Matthew Denise passed away. You know, God bless his soul and his family. And, you know, you just got to keep those decisions. Everything we do has an impact. And, you know, every action has a consequence. And we really have to consider. I've been for, and I have legislation that I filed that would crack down on employers who illegally hire people who are unlawful immigrants coming. And I think it's twofold. I think, first of all, we start with a civil penalty because it could be a mistake. Maybe there was falsification on documents. Who knows? The second time, though, we take a much more
the
stiff.
34th time that you've made the same mistake.
Yeah, it's not a mistake.
I mean, it's
deliberate.
When we had our plant in San Diego, we were very close to the U.S. border.
Mm-hmm.
What we went through on employee verification was absolutely above anything mandated. But I felt good because I knew that anybody who walked in my door, you know, I told HR, open up the records.
Yeah.
If they find something, and we never could say we'd be perfect, but at least if they see what we went through,
Right.
nobody could argue that we weren't trying to live to the spirit, not even the letter of the law.
Yeah. And I think some of these you know, instances happen more with the building trades than anything else. And so, you know, the third strike would be a criminal penalty. And so it just shows that we're very serious about the law. You know, we're a litigious society. That, you know, when you don't follow the law, on the polar opposite, we consider that anarchy, you know, lawlessness, and we cannot be lawless. We have to put in common sense solutions that solve some of these problems.
So you're sticking to your campaign promise?
Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, whether it be the immigration piece or, you know, getting paid to drive to work, you know, I will not take that money.
They found a way of coming after you.
Right.
I mean, I'll put it on the table.
Sure.
Okay. You've been in the Senate X months.
8.
And you get a position, a whip. You don't have to do anything. You just collect a check.
Right. Right.
That was what, in my mind, what was portrayed out there.
Yeah, sure.
You know, you picked on somebody for accepting nickels, and here you go accepting dollars for doing nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Fact or fiction?
I would say fiction. You know, people tend to try to be as sensational as possible to make a headline, and that's fine. Unfortunately, that's the media reality in which we live today.
Let's look at the facts. You've got 6 other senators that you have to monitor.
Sure.
But there's more to being a whip than walking up and down the hall saying, hey, Joe, are you going to vote the right way?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's additional committee assignments. It's making sure that you have to cover what we call informal sessions. Not everything is voted on with all members of the body. Things that are less controversial, for example, a liquor license that happens to be coming
Make sure
through.
things don't kind of sneak through the
So you have to make sure you show up and read everything that's happening in what they call the daily schedule. And I have to go through that and make sure that nothing is slipping through the cracks, because it's very possible that someone could put forward a controversial bill in the state Senate, like this illegal immigration benefit bill that I was talking about, and the safe haven bill, I think is what it's referred to as, the sanctuary cities, which are ridiculous, and they could just slip it through. And so it's my responsibility to make sure that that does not happen. In addition to that, you know, I have to check in on members from a political standpoint. You know, we are a small Republican group, 6 merry men. We call it the
maybe 7 one day.
The minority. What do they say? It's the minority crescent. You know, we are a party on the ascendance in the state Senate. We went from 4 to 6 members, and actually we feel that we have a pretty good shot in a special election that's coming up this November to pick up seat 7. And we see it as, you know, sort of argument policy-wise that will you stand with people like Charlie Baker, who have put forward a bunch of reform proposals, or do you prefer the status quo? And we believe that there should be balance, and I'm responsible from the political side of that standpoint to implementing the strategy to help other people get elected. I did something in last November that doesn't happen too often, defeated an incumbent. And so it's partially I've been given the responsibility to say, take what you did and find other people who can do the same thing and help us restore balance. And I think that that's what politics and our debate is all about. Our democracy depends on people who are willing to run for office. And so for me, that's something that I have to do.
Well, to me, when I think of every day having to read the docket, and not just read it, not skim it, but really look for, what's this? How does that affect Milford?
Right.
That to me sounds like a pretty substantial amount of time that you're investing.
And there's some people who are probably listening right now who are considering the fact that I've called them and said, I'm really sorry, I have to go, I can't make this meeting, I have to get into Boston, for X. And a lot of times that has to do with that daily rigmarole of what's going on and what's happening. And it's a responsibility that I take very seriously. I don't want bad bills to be passed with the blink of an eye. A lot of people remember the headlight bill, the surcharge. That happened while people were asleep at the switch. That was one of those bills that
legislators woke up, said, I signed what?
Yeah, the people in the House and the Republican leadership, and quite frankly, the Democratic leadership, I think a lot of people kind of missed this. This bill was pushed. There was no surcharge attached. It would require that when it's raining out, you'd have your headlights on. And so the second part of that got kind of pushed onto it was a surcharge for the insurance companies, and we repealed it. We repealed it in this budget, and but that's because no one was paying attention. And so I've got to be the guy that's awake at the switch, paying attention.
It's amazing because you say headlights. I got stopped once driving down Leninsky Prospect in Moscow by a cop, and I had learned enough Russian, I understood, and I kept yelling, Turista, ni panamayu, I don't understand.
Yeah.
And he was so mad because I had my headlights on at night. And they had a law that said the Communist Party provides enough light. So by me turning my lights on, it was like insulting them.
Right.
And you sit there and say, okay, who put that law in?
Yeah.
Felt like the same thing as, the headlight law that went in and we signed what?
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how things can happen and slip right through the cracks, and that was one of those instances, and let's hope it doesn't happen again.
So now we talk about committees, and I sit there and say, if I count them right, you're on 6 or 7?
I'm actually now on 8. So when I was in the House, I served on 3. Right. And now, as a member of the Senate, I serve on 8. Some of them are more active than others. Some of them you hope are not as active as others. For example, like ethics, you do not want that committee to be very active because that means there's a really big problem. And one of the things that is a tool which I'm happy to be on is Senate Post Audit and Oversight, which has the power of subpoena. Essentially, if I feel that there is something that is going wrong in state government, in municipal government, I have the ability to request of the chairman that we have a hearing in the Senate.
For most people, explain to me when you say post audit.
Yep. So
what does that really mean to the average Milfordian?
So basically, after money is spent, the Senate, or after some action is taken, the state Senate and the state House have separate committees that is like an oversight, and they basically are the accountability part of the legislature, and they can oversee other parts of state government. And so, for example, when all the problems were happening at DCF and children were going missing, the Post Audit and Oversight chairman of the House basically called the woman in who ran the agency, Olga Roche, and asked her, explain yourself. And that typically will happen when problems occur. It also allows me to investigate certain things that other members might not be able to.
So you fought hard to get us $350,000 this year. If a year from now you looked and said, you guys didn't spend it the way you were supposed to.
We could have a hearing on that. I could be the one that initiated it if, say, $50,000 that was supposed to go to Fino Field went into somebody's pocket. And,
Or more realistically, we got $250,000 for Godfrey Brook. We're all excited. And we paved some roads.
Right, exactly. That would be a major problem. And, I could, if I wanted to, bring that before this committee. And so it's a pretty powerful committee. It's something that I'm privileged to serve on. Thankfully, we haven't had any major disasters
Another committee
happen.
that I don't want very active.
Yeah, that's true. My favorite committee is the Telecommunications, Utilities,
energy.
Yeah.
Last year, my electric rates went way up because fuel went crazy, and I'm supposed to get a break this year.
Yeah, right. Good luck.
Okay.
What I've learned, and this is a subject that is really new to me, and I've spent a lot of time, in fact, I've talked to a lot of people who are experts, and I keep telling them, the month of August, my summer, if I'm on a beach, I'll be reading material about this. Probably won't be on the beach too often, but, whenever I get an opportunity, I'm trying to do my homework and make sure I know about these topics. And what's crazy about energy, especially when people over the winter were looking at their bills, is I kept hearing in these hearings, the price of energy has dropped. The price of energy has dropped. And I'm looking at my national grid bill saying, these people are crazy. They have no idea what they're talking about. Right. And yet the reality is they're correct, and I can explain why. The price of energy per kilowatt hour has dropped overall, but the costs in the equation of how you get billed has changed. So for a long time, there's sort of three things that you get your bill on. When you look at your national grid electric bill, right? You have transmission, distribution, and energy. There's three components to it. Kind of distribution and transmission are together, linked, and energy cost is the cost per kilowatt hour. If you look at it, it's broken down into two divisions in your bill. The top is distribution and transmission. Take a look at it next time. It's typically just as much, if not more,
it's
of
like
what
half
it costs.
And half almost.
It's at least 50%.
Yeah.
In previous years, we always had more attributed in that equation to energy. It usually was like 60% energy costs, 40% distribution,
admin or stuff, whatever they want to call
distribution and transmission. And so what's happened over the course of the last 5 years is the equation's flipped. Energy actually represents about 40% of the bill, 50% sometimes, especially in the winter, and distribution and transmission represents about 60%. And that's because the utility companies have gone out and they have laid down a tremendous amount of transmission lines over the course of the last few years. Those are all subsidized by the ratepayers. And so if you're like me and you're driving down Route 146 and you see these massive steel power lines being erected, there's where, when you look at your bill, there's where the money's going. And so the rate of return on these transmission lines is very high. It's typically 10% for the utility companies. So financially, it makes sense for them to build more transmission so that they can bring in more energy. The other thing is we're looking at a big energy bill taking up in the September, October time period to bring in hydroelectric, which I think is a good thing. I'm a big supporter of green energy.
Renewable.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. There's some controversy about subsidies and taxpayer subsidies going to renewables, but I've done a lot of research and look into it. If you look at oil, coal, every single energy component that we've ever had deliverable has been subsidized by the government. Every single one. Research and development, and it's because it's, to an extent, a matter of great national importance. If you can't turn on the lights, if you can't turn on the electricity, we're not sitting at this show.
You've got coal companies shutting down.
Right.
One of the biggest coal companies declaring bankruptcy. Because we're saying we don't want to pollute the environment with soft coal.
Right.
Okay. So if you don't help somewhere, somebody's got to pick up. It's cheaper to use the coal.
Yeah.
Because China's down 40% on their coal because of the pollution.
Right.
So the market would be much more favorable financially to use soft coal.
Right.
Of course, I don't really envy waking up one day and seeing a black cloud over Milford from the power plant.
Right. We haven't seen that in a long time.
Well, but I mean, we got a power plant everybody's worried about.
Yeah.
5 years later, it was like, we got a power plant?
Right. Well, and this is typically what happens. We talk a lot about, I had asked a guy who came into my office about nuclear energy and, why is that, these are zero carbon-based emissions. Why aren't environmentalists behind that? And obviously I got a long explanation. But, we have to do energy in a measured way. I'm sort of a check all the boxes type guy. I think solar is a really interesting concept. At one point, 5, 6, 7 years ago, financially, it was really expensive. The price has come down a lot. However, the price of labor has gone up because the amount of people installing it has been in high demand. And so the labor costs, and so it's actually at a point where the price is at equilibrium because the technology has driven the price down. However, the cost of installing it has risen. We have an equilibrium. It's a more attractive, more energy efficient, more clean technology. However, we shouldn't just say no to things like coal, to things like natural gas. Right. Natural gas is our best option in Massachusetts if we build some pipelines, which of course can be controversial. But if you want to see a drop in those prices, this is a capacity issue.
I would like a little pipeline drilled to the side of Milford I'm at so I could get natural gas.
Right. But one of the things that I find so interesting is not necessarily where we are, but where we're going. And I think from my generation's standpoint, we are a very independent-minded, autonomous group of individuals. We look at the world very differently, and one of the things is self-sufficiency. Very big on that. Very big on transparency, what's in our food.
Right.
And I think one of the things that's eventually going to happen, people as my generation ages, is that they're going to want to be energy self-sufficient. In fact, maybe even off the grid completely. And the problem right now that we face is the technological component of that. While it's wonderful to have clean energy and solar power, we don't really have the ability to store that power in the batteries. Tesla just came out with a battery, but it only captures, a few megawatts. It's
right.
not, and it is expensive. It's about $3,000 to buy this unit, and it would probably serve as a generator, not something that someone should be reliant upon to make sure that their lights and refrigerator is working. But as battery technology progresses, which it hasn't since the 1980s, which is really frustrating, I think, to a lot of people, this energy that we produce from solar production on someone's roof is going to be able to be retained and used at a later point, and that's going to change society.
Well, when you start thinking about the image, when I was a kid, you'd look, and if there was these ugly, big black boxes on somebody's roof, it was like, okay, what kind of cancer did that roof develop?
Right.
Today, the panels look much nicer. They're much more efficient.
Yeah.
So, I have no issue at all in issuing subsidies.
Yeah.
Because it's really investing.
Yep.
For the long term. The more of those panels we get up, or when you drive on the Mass Pike and you see the solar panel farm.
Yep.
Never saw those before.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think they're ugly. That's my personal opinion, but I don't mind it because I understand the end goal. I saw my subsidy. I finally looked at my energy bill. I paid 39 cents this month to subsidize the expansion of solar. And I know at some point John Tien's going to be listening to this. He's called my office a few times. John, we definitely raised the cap on net metering, and he'll understand that. Basically, there's been sort of this stagnation in central Massachusetts. We had reached the cap for solar, for basically developing solar projects, except for residential. Commercial solar was at the standpoint. And so we just in the Senate raised that. Hopefully the House will do the same thing so we can continue to invest. There's a bunch of federal tax credits that people have been taking advantage of, and that's something we'd like to see happen. It unfortunately will go away at the end of this year.
They say that every year.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Let's hope that
it gives you incentive to do something, right?
Some of the silly things that the federal government subsidizes.
Yeah.
This one seems worthwhile.
Yeah.
Because it really is an investment, when you think about it, in the nation's future.
Yeah.
It's less oil we have to buy.
Yeah.
It's less that we have not towards self-sufficiency.
It's part of this innovation economy that's truly incredible. One of the other committees that I serve on is the Revenue Committee, which used to be called the Taxation Committee. They, kind of politically changed that name, but what's interesting is some of the bills that become ahead of us and before us, and one of them is this Airbnb, which if you go on Airbnb, the letter B.com, you can see people who have an extra room in their house, and they put it up on this, and you can go rent it. And instead of spending $200 $250, $300 a night to stay in a city. You can stay in someone's house for $79, or you can. It's competition, and we're using technology to compete. And so the reason.
Do I get my 6%?
So that
I like the fact we've got all these hotels on Fortune Boulevard.
That's exactly why this was before the revenue.
Oh,
committee,
okay.
Because some do not collect hotels tax. And so, there was a representative from Boston, once again, Boston, the bane of our existence, saying, well, they need to pay taxes. And to a degree, they're right. But I want to make sure that this innovation economy is not stifled, because it's incredible. Uber, what Uber is doing and competing with taxi cab drivers, it's unbelievable. That I have a service where within a minute I can get an Uber service, a car, that has a driver just like a taxi cab, use my phone, have them show up right where I want them to show up within a minute, the type of car I want, how many passengers I need to, travel. It's incredible. And these are the types of things that we need to continue to develop, because that's going to change our country.
Uber, I think about Polaroid. They had the market cornered on instant photography.
Right.
And they refused to change.
Yep.
So, I sit there and say, as far as moving me temporarily from point A to point B, the taxi drivers still have a corner on the market.
They do.
Uber's going to force them.
To innovate.
Yes.
They have.
I don't want to get into a smelly, nasty old taxi.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you want my money, you'll innovate. You will adjust to what I want out of a car.
Exactly. It's the way it should be. It's competition. It's capitalism.
Free market, the American way. Are we missing something?
This is why we are the greatest nation in the world, because we have a free economy where people with good ideas can compete. And taxi cabs and their companies are going to have to compete. And the people who finance the medallions to allow them to operate, they're going to have to compete. And they're going to have to find alternative financing methods. And it's a good thing, because it will make them stronger. Same thing with Uber. I'm now learning about autonomous cars that will one day drive themselves. They already exist. Tesla has built a few, and it's sort of futuristic stuff, but it's really amazing how it's going to change. And we have 2 states that have put in the nation that have put in laws in place. California is one of them, and I believe Tennessee is the other. To govern cars that drive themselves. The amount of technology, the implications of that, it's going to be unbelievable.
Let me take you back, 8 months, actually more than that, almost a year. You came on the show and you talked about your strong feelings towards helping kids. Kids in the foster system.
Yeah.
Okay, we're 8 months into it. Have you done anything?
Sure, yeah. It goes back to an idea that I was born and raised with by my parents, is that we have to take care of each other. That your next door neighbor is not just your neighbor, it's your brother and your sister. And, this is God's world, and we should treat each other like, that's the world we live in. So for me, foster kids, a lot of times come from difficult situations. I was friendly with one of them when I was a graduate student, and I learned some of his personal stories, some horrific, some inspiring. And this is a man who made it to Harvard. So he reached the apex of education. At least they think so, right? And, for me, I want to make sure, especially after what we saw with the Department of Children and Families last year and the year before that these kids, when they get into foster care, are safe and are in good situations, and that they have the ability to maintain their own personal records. And so what I mean by that is, a lot of times, because there's such a transient population, foster children will go from one home to the next, from one school to another school, from one doctor to another doctor. Yep. Exactly. They are always changing, and medical records get lost, immunizations get lost, educational testing and standards get lost. And so to me, this is unacceptable. We did some research and we filed a bill, and that bill is actually moved out of the committee in a favorable approval, which means it's on the path to success, hopefully. And so we called it an electronic backpack. And it was kind of funny when I testified, because people were so confused about what was an electronic backpack. No one had really ever heard of it. California and Texas actually have implemented laws. They both did it differently. One actually did it privately. They privately funded. I'll let you guess which one of those states it was. But basically, this is a mechanism to allow children who are in foster care to carry their records with them and not to have them lost, and have it be distributed electronically. So that if I'm a foster child and I have, a doctor, that the doctor takes those medical records, puts them in an electronic file. Same thing with my educational records, whatever it might be, and they travel from house to house, from town to town, from state to state. It's a bill that has some complications. There's no question about that. Privacy being one of them for medical records. But through the legislative process, we're going to figure that out.
That's just a technological hurdle.
Yeah.
When you think about one of the things that Milford, Uncle Phil Ciaramicoli is taking pride in is EMR, electronic medical records.
Yep.
They have found a way to meet HIPAA standards for people who are in the Milford medical system. Okay, so it's not too much of a reach.
Yeah.
To say if you're doing it for and I hate to say the normal, but the typical person. Okay, so now you got this poor kid who's already got enough on their back.
Yeah.
How hard is it to come up with a way of, tying it in the cloud, the state cloud?
Right.
Say, okay, guys, here's your Social Security number. Every time we do something,
Yeah.
it's going to be sitting in Beacon Hills cloud.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to necessarily be state run. It can be a nonprofit, a quasi-public. There's a lot of ways to do this. And actually what my bill would do is research the ways that we can implement a system like this. How do we conceptualize it? How do we make it successful? How do we protect the children? And actually one of the reasons I had mentioned earlier that the Senate President is coming to Milford to have dinner with us is we're talking about this bill because he was a foster child. And, people who he's very close to were foster children as well. And so that's something that I think is really important for a vulnerable part of society. And in my belief of government has a role, limited, but when in action, has to make sure that vulnerable people are safe and are self-sustaining.
And Ryan, I can't imagine what it takes to be a foster parent. I know I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I get exchange students in, and after they lived with us for a few months, they're like part of the family. I could never.
Yeah.
I could just see getting a foster child in. They'd never leave the house.
Right. Yeah, no,
it's just amazing to have people who can put so much, and it's always easy to focus on the 1% that are problems.
Yeah.
But, for the 99% of these people who somehow can open their families, open their homes,
Yeah.
and then when it's time, let the kids go. Oh my God.
I've learned a lot about this from my wife as well, who is the Worcester County Register of Probate. She deals with family matters every single day. And basically, unfortunately, a lot of these foster kids become pawns in a larger game of parental control. A lot of times the parents who have given up their children in the foster system are not responsible parents. Many times they're not loving parents. Sometimes they are.
Sure.
But there's a lot that aren't. And then they drag the child into court because of a personal dispute between the father and the mother, and they want to make the child sort of responsible for their irresponsibility. And to me, that's unacceptable, and we need to do more with foster kids, make sure that they're in a safe environment, make sure those families who bring foster children into their own home and feed them, that they're reimbursed appropriately. They do get funds, but I don't think it's very high. I believe it's $8 a day. It's very low. It's somewhat
$200 a month.
Yeah, it's very low. It's incredibly low. I might be a little bit off. It could be $10 a day, but it is
$300 a month.
Yeah, it's very insignificant.
You're not doing this for the love of money.
And you are taking those kids out of the public system pretty much. You're giving them a loving home. You're trying to help these children become productive members of their school, of their society. But I think we can do a lot more, and it's something that I'm willing to work on, and I'm willing to go above and beyond to help these kids.
And I get criticized for saying once kids get into Milford, they're our kids, they bleed Milford red, we take care of them.
Right.
And it was always the issue of, well, the state says this. I don't care.
Yeah.
Milfordians, have never needed somebody outside of the center of the universe
Yeah.
to tell them how to take care of our kids.
Right.
So if any of those kids end up in Milford,
Yeah.
yeah, you take care of them because they're ours.
Absolutely.
And they've got enough on their backs already, getting over being bounced from house to house or family to family.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it goes through to become part of a family and then all of a sudden, oh, you're moved.
Yeah. No, I can't either. And I'm blessed to have been in the situation I am, and maybe one day my wife and I will be foster parents and we'll be able to help kids at some point.
So we're close to the great debate. I think last count is 17 or...
The Olympics, that's over. Biggest political disaster, I think, in Massachusetts political history. But
I mean, I've got to go see. I got to watch this on TV. Because I don't know how you take 10 people and actually get them. It'd feel like a soundbite.
yeah, the presidential race is quite interesting. And, the Republicans have put up a lot of candidates. 17 at this point, who knows? I can assure you I will not be announcing.
Not yet.
And my wife can assure you that won't be happening.
Stephanie will have more to say.
Yeah. But, it's going to be a spirited debate, and, that's what 2016 is all about. I'm very focused on my own reelection. I definitely will be running for reelection. I really enjoy this job. I like helping people. I feel like we have done what we said we were going to do. From a policy standpoint, we've put forward ideas and implemented certain changes that we wanted to see happen. From a accountability standpoint, when our phone rings, and if it's someone from Milford or Southbridge or even Worcester that I don't represent, we call them back. And I'm sure every once in a while someone calls us, no one answers after 4 times, it doesn't go to voicemail, they hang up, they're upset. I'm sure those things happen, but for the most part we have called everybody back and done our best to help them. And from my own standpoint, I said I would never miss a vote. I haven't missed a vote since I've been in the Senate. I've never missed a vote since I've been a member of the House of Representatives. I'm 151 for 151 in this first 8 months, and I believe I was about 671 votes in the House.
So Mass Fiscal gave you a rating. How do you explain such a low rating? You only got a 97%.
Yeah. Well, the only rating that I really care about is Election Day, and do I get the endorsement of the people who vote for me and that I represent. And, back in the campaign, I kind of was laughing. Bill Weld endorsed Senator Moore, and Charlie Baker called me up and he said, I'm going to endorse you. And I said, fantastic. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter.
You don't get to vote in my district.
Right. When did you move to Milford?
Right.
And so, that's really the perspective that I look at. Mass Fiscal is a fiscally responsible type group that judges legislators based on the way they vote.
But they're going to give you a rating. You made some commitments. And they're saying, okay, by our reasoning, you're living up to at least 97% of them.
Right.
I guess that's not too bad of a grade. If I got 97 in school, my parents wouldn't have been mad at me.
I guess that's not too bad. Yeah. I haven't looked at what votes they've actually ranked. But I know that there was one that was an internet sales tax, because that was quite a doozy that just happened. Basically aligning Massachusetts with whatever the federal government might do. I voted against it. I don't think taxing internet sales is a good idea. I think that if the federal government is going to do something, they're going to do something. But I don't think we should take it upon ourselves in Massachusetts, nor do I think constitutionally we can. However, what we did, which I think is wrong, is we said, we as Massachusetts will mimic anything the federal government does. So if the federal government decides that anybody who's an online retailer who sells out of, say, Nebraska into Massachusetts, they currently don't have to pay Massachusetts sales tax. But the federal government may decide not only do you have to pay Massachusetts sales tax, but you also have to pay sales tax in Nebraska. That is a proposal that is currently on the table before Congress. I am opposed to that, and that would put online...
Why does that make sense?
It makes no sense.
If you wanted to make the argument that, okay, if you buy something, I'm in Milford,
Yep.
I buy something. If I go to bricks and mortar, I pay X.
Yep.
If I buy it in the Ethernet, I buy it up in the ethereal network, wherever, the internet lies.
Yep.
I don't care where it's coming from, whether it's coming from Nebraska, South Dakota, it's landing in Milford.
Yeah.
So I could almost understand, okay, if a bricks and mortar guy's paying 5%,
Yep.
are you buying it in, the internet?
Right.
You pay 5% or 6.25, whatever.
Right.
But to double tax you?
It's a proposal before Congress, and if Congress were to implement something like that, Massachusetts just voted, the state Senate, I voted against it, to line our standards up with them. And so this is sort of the nitty gritty that people don't like to get into, because the argument that you made is fairly reasonable, but that's not necessarily the argument that's going to be implemented. And so to me, it was too much to put a massive...
Sounds like a sneaky way to get an extra tax in there.
I've never seen the government say that we don't want more revenue. I've dealt a lot with the people who represent other parts of the state.
What was that temporary tax to fund World War I? The IRS and the federal tax?
We just debated a sales tax holiday. I voted for it. I think it's a good thing. I'd like to see the sales tax go back down to 5% like it was. It's a regressive tax. It hurts poor people. It hurts the elderly. However, the people of Massachusetts are still waiting for their income tax holiday.
What happened to what we voted on dropping the income tax?
Their income tax holiday has been 15 years in the making, and they still haven't realized it. They voted on it. It's been delayed, gradually set the economics. That's not what they voted on, And so I am all about looking at our tax code and seeing how we might change it to make it more equitable, make it more affordable for people to live in our state, make Massachusetts more economically competitive. One of the things I'd love to look at is property tax, because that's a real tough one for a lot of people. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we're not increasing the tax burden on people. That's just that's one of those commitments that I made. I'm not going to raise people's taxes, and I want to make sure that government lives within its means and we find efficiencies.
Well, the property tax, you're always going to have an issue. Take the average house in Milford pays $4,400. We have some houses paying $9,000. And you sit there and say, okay, how do I justify? I'm paying $4,400, you're paying $9,000. Okay, 61% of our spend is schools.
Yeah.
Do you use twice as much schools as me?
Right.
Let's see, if I put in fire, police, you're 80, 90% of the spend.
Yeah.
Do you use twice as much police as me?
Right.
Yeah. And the only justification you can have is because you can afford it.
Right. Yeah. And I actually think that that's the kind of language that really needs to leave our political process. The people who don't pay their fair share, and this class warfare, divisiveness. We're at the end of the day, we're all Americans. We're all human beings, and we need to unite on issues. There's respectful debates that can be had, but there will be a big debate in about 4 years about whether or not people who make more money should pay more of an income tax. Right now we have a flat tax. 5.15%. There's a proposal to raise that tax up to 9.15% to those who make more money. And I can tell you from a personal experience, just a situation back in 2009, there was a group of people who were very successful in the town of Webster. They started this little company called Commerce Insurance. Many of them became millionaires overnight in 2008 when they sold it to MapFree out of Spain. And one of the families involved has consistently given a tremendous amount of money to the Webster Food Share to make sure that the people who can't afford food get it. In 2009, when the economy collapsed, the one gentleman who started the company called and said, "How are things going?" And the people who ran it said, "Things are terrible." He said, "Consider myself tripling my donation." When you take money away from people, they don't have that same generosity.
Right.
The greatness of our country is the generosity of our people. There's a lot of ways in this world we can measure people. And I had this debate with a friend of mine. He said, America is not the greatest country in the world. And I said, it depends on how you measure it. And if you look at generosity, we're more generous than anywhere in the world. And so we give more money away to nonprofits, to good organizations that help people. And I get really afraid of the day where people say, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to give any extra money.
It's always funny when you talk about they should pay more. The one universal thing I've always found is the definition of they is $1 more than my income.
Right.
You know, if I make 50 grand, anybody above 51 should pay more.
Yeah.
If I make 100, anybody above 101.
Right. And the reality is, with the exception of income in Massachusetts, a lot of times these people do pay more. They pay more in sales tax because they buy more things. They pay more in excise tax because maybe they have 2 cars.
Right.
They pay more in property taxes because they probably have a little bit of a bigger house. You know what? They even, when you age things out over the course of time, they actually may pay more in income tax because they have more kids because they can afford it, who then pay more income taxes. You know, so there's one way of narrowly looking at things, which I think we need to get away from, and then broadening our view and saying, how can we help people? You know, there's a function of government that is supposed to help people, but to demonize one group because they've been successful,
I love
that's
the guy
not good.
that they had an interview with this fellow, and he was paying $3 million in taxes. And there was a group telling him he wasn't paying his fair share. And I sat there and I looked and said, you know, I don't know about you, but not a lot of my friends pay $3 million in taxes a year.
Yeah.
Probably none.
Right.
So to tell this guy he's not paying his fair share because percentages,
Yeah.
I don't remember ever going to Shaw's saying, here's my percentage that I'm paying.
Yeah.
Can I have free bread?
Well, and the other thing is, a lot of these people who started their own businesses that became successful, maybe made them a millionaire, they didn't start that way. And they invested a bank loan that they had full responsibility to pay back. And if they failed, you know, perhaps they'd be bankrupt, and, you know, it'd affect their lives for the rest of it. You know, they're the ones that assumed all the risk.
But see, I
and
can
we
see
don't
an
talk
alternate
about that.
minimum tax where
Yeah.
you say, do all the shelters, all the games,
Yeah.
but you're going to pay at least X.
Right.
That to me is your minimum fair share.
Yeah.
Okay, so, you know, God bless you if you made 20 million this year.
You know, just another quick example, going back to Webster, just because I've seen it, that's where I live. The same people from Commerce Insurance, the town couldn't afford to build a new police station. So 2 individuals gave $500,000, they built a new police station. The town couldn't afford to put an extra police officer on the street. There's parts of Webster that are not good parts to walk in at night. They're dangerous, there's drugs, there's violence. And so this gentleman decided it was worth the investment. He gave the town enough money to put a police officer in those bad parts. This is the philanthropy, the generosity of people who have done well and who want to give back. This idea that they don't want to, and that they haven't paid their fair share, or that they're not willing to part ways, and it's like Scrooge, it's just not a correct depiction.
Well, sounds like an exciting 8 months.
Yeah, it's been really exciting. I'm still very enthusiastic.
We look forward to a few months from now when you come back and tell us what new things you've done.
Excellent. I know that there's a long laundry list of things coming up in the fall, so I'm happy to share.
Well, it's a good start to bring 350,000 this way.
Hopefully we'll do more.
But that's a good start.
Yeah.
And as always, reach out to the people who represent us. Just don't wait till there's a problem in your mind. If you have ideas, reach out to Senator Fatman, Representative Fernandez. These are the people who can make changes happen for Milford.
Fatman.com.
Fatman.com.
That's
there
the
you
best
go.
way to get me.
And as always, to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless, and may tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you.
Great.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.